Greetings and salutations, Afrolites. It is I, Afromandius, back with another video today. And let's just say, again, kind of make the intro short because not a lot has happened over the past couple of weeks. Not past couple of weeks, over this past week. Kind of the same old, except, in this video today, we're going to be talking about a new and all different type of character, okay? So, I'm going to need you guys to stick with me on this one because it's going to get pretty ridiculous, honestly. But honestly, when it comes down to this character, I'm really excited to talk about him because, one, he is the structural foundation of one of the three, main characters that I've already been going over. And I've kind of hinted to him in my past, other videos, kind of, alluding to him being like a role model, or not role model, but a big brother of sorts. But, this character I'm really excited to talk about today because he has no connection to any sort of the other stuff that I've been talking about in the past videos of mine, all right? So there's going to be no mentioning of a Great War saga, there's no elementals, there's no freaking Xerxians, there's no Cinderella Man, none of that. So, this is a completely new character, and that we're going to be talking about the big clown himself, Bonk. All right, let's give it a round of applause to Big Clown. Woohoo! We love clowns around here. Unless you were back in 2016 when we all hated clowns. You guys remember that? You remember the 2016 thing where just idiots would dress up as clowns and terrorize people? That was a great time. Really weird time. Anywho, so let's talk about Bonk right quick. Who is he? What is he? Well, he's not a Xerxian. He's not a Jurian. He's not an elemental. And he's not a Jury. He's not even human. You guys supposed to be wondering and thinking to yourselves, well then, Afro, what is he? He's a clown. No, seriously, Afro, what is he? That's what he is. He's a clown. And you guys are thinking to yourselves what the heck? Why? Wait, clowns? I thought clowns are like a profession, whatnot. Or, people acting stupid, you give them the title of a clown, right? It's yes and no. So you see, in my universe, there are these fifth interdimensional beings known as clowns. And basically, as, I'm going to make it short because this video is about Bonk and not about the clown specifically. But I may make a video talking about the species differentiates, how different they are from humans. But in a weird sense, all I'm going to cut it short is that they're basically fifth dimensional beings who have the ability to find desire and try to make people laugh. And so basically they're they're not evil in a sense, but they very much are little trickster kind of not trickster gods, but they very much are they are traveling beings who just like to spread laughter throughout the universe and whatnot, right? So, basically they're just these people who, as we imagine clowns white, they have paley white skin, or it ranges on the color spectrum of what their skin looks like or whatnot. It doesn't have to be just pale white, but they have off-color skin, they have big round noses, they have weird hairstyles, and they have size 14 feet. I say that not a lot of people have size 14 feet, but just stick with me on this one, right? So basically they are, I'm still kind of working on where they come from, where do they go, where they come from, Cotton Eye Joe. But all you need to know is that they are human-like beings who find desire in laughter and whatnot, right? They try to spread joy throughout the universe, and that's kind of the reason how we, or at least it explains why they're ghost in our pop culture zeitgeist and whatnot, is because of these little tiny beings. Well, they're not tiny, but they're basically these beings who travel across dimensions and to spread laughter and play tricks and whatnot, right? So, while there's being clowns, there's one being, or there's one race that you do not want to come across when it comes to these clowns, and those are Psycomedians. Afro, what the heck is a Psycomedian? Now, as I mentioned back in my last video of the legend video, I don't really go in depth about it, but just think about it like this. The Psycomedians are basically what you don't want to meet in a clown, right? So while clowns want to spread joy and whatnot, how we imagine most evil clowns, those are considered Psycomedians and whatnot, right? So not evil clowns, but psycho comedian, psycho. You guys, yeah, put a check in the mail. You know, I'm so creative. Like, it just, you can't even fathom what my mind juices come up with. Psychomedian. I came up with that. I'm a freaking genius. Anywho, so basically, what psychomedians are, they're kind of the, like, I yin to the clown's yang. They are very much like, there has to be comedy and tragedy and whatnot, right? So again, I'm not really going to go in depth about what the like physiology of psychomedians are and whatnot. I'm not going to be talking about the physiology of clowns. Those are going to be in its own separate video, and I actually even have like a story that I'm working on for Bonk's like parents and whatnot, because I'm going to allude in this video because he's more than just a clown. So long intro aside, let's get into it. What is he? I just said it. He's a clown. Where did he come from? He comes from the clown dimension. I need you guys to stick with me on this one, okay? So basically, the clown dimension is just our dimension, but a little more cartoony, a little more unrealistic, I guess you could say. People are walking their balloon animals and, making parties all day and night, eating sweets and stuff like that. So that's basically what the clown dimension is. I need to go back to my last video because I think I gave it a name. I think it was like the Honk dimension or something. I don't know. It's like the Honk-HA or something, the Honk-HA dimension. Basically, it's just the clown's home world where they, repopulate, and, that's kind of where all they learn to be a clown and whatnot, right? But, in this dimension, there's also, as we have our religion, there's also religion in the Honk-HA dimension, which basically follows the powers and prosperity of the one true clown god known as Honk-HA. So I know what you guys are gonna say. Honk-HA? Yes, I know it's a meme. Honk-HA. Place it down in the comments. I thought it was kind of funny, and also it kind of stuck. Honk-HA. So basically, the clowns follow the rules and the teachings of Honk-HA, which is basically clown god and whatnot. And I'm not really gonna go into him, but when I go over my like clown psychomedian video talking about them, I'll go a little more in depth about where he came from. But basically, think of him as like clown god and whatnot. And basically, when there's a clown heaven, there's a clown hell. So what is this clown hell, you may be asking? And that would be considered Grinfell. Grinfell, 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 which basically is clown hell and whatnot, right? So all the mean, naughty clowns and a lot of psychomedians go straight down there or whatnot, right? But as going out aside, there was this one clown. This one clown was named Chuckles the Clown. And basically, he was kind of like this, not special force agent, but he was very much like the ringleader of this like ragtag group called Clowns. And it was an abbreviation for something, but I could not for the life of me think of what it is right now. But just think of them as kind of being agents for a sector of the galaxy, for them like spreading joy and whatnot, right? So Chuckles, or his nickname Chuck, basically one day, they were kind of coming across this dimension, or this like cave that was infested with psychomedians and whatnot, right? So the psychomedians and clowns have this ongoing rivalry where kind of like the Jedi and the Sith. I don't want to call it a race war, but it was definitely a race war. It was like fighting for dominance and whatnot, right? But the clowns always came out on top, because what the clowns lack in the psychomedians' strength, speed, and durability, endurance, blah, 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 they made up for it in intelligence and whatnot. The clowns are very, very intelligent beings. They use their resources, and to comedic effect, they are able to build absolutely anything and everything they wish, right? So that's going to be presented in Bonk when I get to his powers and abilities. But, let's get back to Chuck's right quick, right? So Chuck's and his team kind of goes into this cave, and they discover a psychomedian nest. Obviously, that's not good news, because the psychomedians tend to repopulate like rabbits, if you get what I'm saying, Anywho, so basically the infestation kind of breaks out, and all these psychomedians and clowns are fighting one another. But there was this one psychomedian who stood out, because instead of fighting, she ran away. And so, Chuck and the others were like, go after her, like, blah, blah, blah. But, well, actually not Chuck. One of his allies, Ah, I think his name was like Bruno. Yeah, Bruno. So Bruno, who is like the big muscular clown of the group. I know I'm. Anywho, just focus that Bruno said, "Go after her. We want all Psychomedians dead." And Chuck, like, he was on board, but he realized that this Psychomedian didn't fight back at all. Like, regardless of how, how much we fired upon, her kin and her family and the rest of the nest, she didn't do anything to fight back. So instead, he said, "Calm down, Bruto. Let's just let me handle it." And so, he did. He kind of went there. He took a Jolly with him, which was basically he was the oldest of the group, so he kind of like kept him there as like a mentor and whatnot. He was like the team's like heart and glue of the team. So him and Jolly basically went down and tracked this Psychomedian, and they found her like just kind of at the bottom of like a bridge somewhere. It's not. I'm still kind of writing things out, but basically he catches up with the Psychomedian, but instead of killing her, he shows mercy towards her because he saw that she wasn't really fighting back, so he wants to try to see if maybe because there's this weird transformation that clowns kind of go through. They have this thing inside of their necks, which is called the gag reflex. The gag reflex. I just realized how wrong that sounds. The gag reflex, and it's in. Anywho, I'm going off topic. Basically, Chuck kind of brings in the Psychomedian, and he asks like, "What is your name?" Yeah, for someone so passive, you have to have a name, right? And she's like, "I don't have a name. I'm just another Psychomedian in the nest." And so he was like, "You don't have a name? And so he kind of looks around and kind of thinks to himself, like, what name could I possibly give you? You're big, you kind of, you're big, but you're soft, but you're not like cotton. You can pop at any moment. Bubbles." And so that's how she went that name from now on. She goes by Bubbles. So basically at this point, Bubbles is now a part of the clown team and kind of works, as kind of another big bruiser, but this one, is a lot more like animalistic, I guess you can say. So, basically over time, her and Chuck, kind of get a little close. And yes, clowns reproduce sexually. I know, as weird as clowns can get, they still have some sort of normalcy to them. Like some clowns, if like desperate times call for desperate measures, reproduce asexually. I'm not going to get into like how that happens or how that works. That will be for another video. Let's just focus on Chuck and Bubbles, okay? So, they love each other. They, Chuck and Bubbles sitting in the tree, KSSING, so they kind of built their foundation and, their love for one another, right? Going on these different missions. She kind of opens up about her past and he opens up about his, them kind of understanding one another and believing that, maybe if we are able to kind of get you on our side, maybe we can get a lot more Psychomedians on this side. Because when it comes down to Chuck, he doesn't really like, fighting and destroying like Psychomedian nests, as bad as they can be. He, in a technical sense, it's still his kin, if you think about it. Like they're still clowns, but they are a lot more dangerous and, a lot more brutal and feral. So he believes that if he's able to, reform Bubbles, then maybe he could reform a lot more like Psychomedians and whatnot, right? So he kind of orders his team to kind of stop with the whole like lethalness of killing, Psychomedians, and instead impersonating them and whatnot, right? Kind of get them through like different types of, rehabilitation and whatnot. This is going in 10 minutes, so and we still haven't talked about Bonk yet. Basically, they kiss, they love, boom, bam, bop. Bubbles is pregnant with Bonk. Whoa! Put in like a crowd sound effect. Oh my God, she's pregnant. Oh no. Okay, so basically at this point in the story, she realized, she doesn't want to be a Psychomedian anymore. And so, I failed to mention that, in the nest, the whole like clown team didn't necessarily kill all the Psychomedians. In fact, there was one Psychomedian left, and that was Slugger. And that Slugger was the older brother of, Bubbles and whatnot, right? So, he kind of figured this out, and, he also was a part of the team for a little bit, but he was kind of like a needed ally, I guess you could say. Like, he was very much like fingers crossed the entire time. Like, if I ever get the chance, I will turn my back on you and I will backstab you. So Lord Slugger was not a nice dude to be around, despite him being a clown of sorts. But, basically he and Bubbles kind of like butt heads all the time because, sibling rivalry and whatnot. But, he wanted Bubbles to kind of step up and lead the tribe into a new like frontier for the Psychomedians and whatnot, right? So he hated the fact that now she's been domesticated, which that is a wild statement. This whole video is wild, just like clown breeding and domestication. Anywho, so he calls her domesticated because, she was taken in by the clowns and she was tamed and whatnot, right? So she takes offense to this. They have a big fight and whatnot, and basically she kind of throws him out. And so at this point now, Bonk is like fully born, and everyone is kind of throwing up an upstir about this. Like, some people are like, "Oh yay, a happy bundle of joy," and others are like, "This thing is filth. It's a disgusting Psychomedian half-breed. Ew, throw it out. Whatnot. Get that mixed thing out of here." You know what I'm saying? So, some clowns were xenophobic, others were a little more accepting. So, kind of stirred a little controversy in Honk-HA. So, this kind of, threw a little wrench into their relationship because, Bubbles thought that she was a little more accepted into the community, but it turns out that she was still kind of, hated because of her physiology and whatnot. So, but Chuck was still kind of there to like, be there for her and love her. And no matter what the outside world said, he knows that in his heart, he has feelings for her. Obviously, they have a kid, so there's bound to be at least a little bit of love there, right? So basically, her and Bonk kind of, Chuck and Bonk kind of grew up into this family, and Bonk obviously kind of learned some things from his father, but he doesn't really get to learn a lot about his mother's side, and she kind of kept it that way. And every time he like asked about it, she would always kind of like blow off the question and kind of turn it into a different topic and whatnot. Kind of like that, one uncle you would have at the dinner party who kind of did some obscene things, and everyone's kind of like, so what about Uncle Chuck? It's like, we don't talk about Uncle Chuck. He's Anywho, so basically, Bonk over time kind of learned and developed like his skills with building and whatnot, right? So he built different types of machines and different types of inventions and whatnot along with his father. His father was a great engineer, so he also became a great engineer, right? So, but over time, laying dormant inside of Bonk was his Psychomedian physiology. So, compared to the like rest of the clowns, obviously you got like Bruno there, who's like a, like an Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of like, big clown and whatnot. But then you have Bonk, who's just like a 3-year-old child, and he's already like up to like, his chest area, like Bruno's chest area is still kind of built too. So, he like clowns, they're not short. They're like average height or like even shorter than most humans. So they're around like maybe 5 foot, 4 foot, around that range and whatnot. And Psychomedians tend to stand at like 7 foot, 6 foot tall. So, obviously the physiology there is kind of getting a little wonky, and, Bonk is starting to like feel some things inside of him. It's not, he's going through clown puberty yet, but he feels like this burning rage, this burning violence inside of him. And so basically his mom and his dad kind of sit him down and kind of tell him, like, yes, you are not only a clown, but you are also a Psychomedian. And so Bonk doesn't really understand this. He doesn't know what a Psychomedian is. And basically, Psychomedians tend to have this like not tattoo, but like tend to have this scarring on their body to show that they are a Psychomedian. So as weird as it sounds, stick with me, but basically his mom, she takes off clothing, not like that, but basically kind of takes off her shirt and kind of shows him that there's like a scar like on her like stomach and whatnot, and Bonk has this, not in the same spot, but it's like he also has a scar on his body. It's a little more faint, but it was definitely there. So he wanted to learn more about the Psycomedians and whatnot, and so they were like, no, this is the last you're ever going to hear about Psycomedians. And so obviously over time, I meant to say, like, when he was at that height of like Bruno and whatnot, he was around like 4 or so. And, basically he's kind of growing up now. And basically this is kind of where shit hits the fan. So Lord Slugger comes back, and he's kind of acquired the powers of Grinfell and kind of took over Honk-HA. So basically, everything's going to shit. Everyone's kind of like scrambling and yelling, and it's like, oh my god, the clowns are fighting their best. Like, they're doing their best to fight against the Psychomedian horde, but they're just too much for them. And so in the last-ditch effort to kind of get them away, or get Bonk at least away from the terribleness and the destruction, Chuck summons a portal and throws him through the portal as he is overcome by, Grinfell and whatnot. And you're wondering, like, well, what happened to Bubbles? Unfortunately, she fell too. In the last-ditch effort to protect both Bonk and Chuck, she fought against her brother and her brother Slugger slayed her. So, now that he's tossed to the portal, it's kind of obvious where this is going to go to. This portal was straight to Earth. So, on this, like, Earth, he's kind of looking around. He's confused. He doesn't know what's going on. This place is a lot more dull. It's a lot more realistic. People are walking actual dogs. Where are the parties? Where are the festivals? Where are the balloon animals and stuff like that? This place is dull and boring. So, he's trying to, kind of walk around. He's kind of looking around, and people are kind of giving him looks, because you see this little clown child walking down the street, and he's just kind of like, where's the happiness? Why is everyone so sad and down? And so basically he notices this homeless man, and he kind of goes up to him, and he's like, sir, where are we? He's like, we are the homeless man says to Bonk, he's like, we are in New York, son. Where are you? Where are you from? Like, he looks like this clown child. Now, keep in mind, like, when clowns are born, they look exactly like they do as they age. So, there's just this child. And if you've seen my Instagram, you know what Bonk looks like. He literally has no hair at the top. And, like, I don't know what you would call that hairstyle. Like, it's, like, he has no hair at the top, but, like, he has, like, little, like, I don't know what you would call it, but basically he has that hairstyle, and he has a big bulging red nose, and, like, he's just this clown kid, and he's just like, where are you from, son? He's like, I'm from Honk-HA. And, like, the drunk old man's just like, yeah, I'm gonna stop drinking for a while, and he goes to sleep. So time passes, and Bonk is trying to understand the world around him and whatnot, but he comes across this little red child. And as you guys know, as I mentioned back in my last video, this little red child is Blaze. And obviously this is kind of where they kind of meet up, and, they kind of help each other out. Bonk building a lot more machines and, like, mechanisms to kind of help, steal from different bakeries and whatnot, because, what else do they got, right? They don't really have any parents. They don't have a home. They're just homeless children kind of fighting for scraps and whatnot, right? So this gets so bad that, obviously their headlines saying, like, look out for this clown and the red girl and whatnot. So Bonk realized that they can't really be out on the street anymore, so they got to find a new home. So, Bonk and Blaze find this abandoned place, and of course, as you know back from my last video, this is Mother Salem's orphanage and whatnot, right? So they kind of go in, they break in, and they try to steal some supplies, but they also realize that this is a home, so they could probably make do with this place right here, right? So Mother Salem, Mother Salem catches them and kind of asks, like, where are you? Who did you come from? Like, who are you? Where did you come from? Where's your family? And it's like, we don't have a family. We don't know, at least, like, they know where they come from, obviously, but they're like, we don't really have a family. We're kind of just on our own. And so realizing this, she's like, oh, her, like, Mother Salem's motherly instincts kick in, and she kind of adopts those two. So that's kind of where Bonk and Blaze, like, meet their adoptive mother, and they kind of become a big happy family and whatnot. So more time passes, and obviously, as I mentioned back in my last video talking about these guys, they start this, like, not influencer, but basically this, like, bodyguard, like heroes for hire kind of, like, business. It's very small, and obviously they, get paid a wage that allows them to kind of keep the orphanage up and whatnot. The thing is that Mother Salem doesn't know this. Like, she thinks that they are just going out into their 9 to 5 job, and it's like, all right, have a good day at work, sweetheart. Because if she ever knew that what they were doing, she would immediately put a stop to it and whatnot, right? Because she doesn't want her kids, like, getting in trouble or getting hurt and whatnot. So, over time, this is kind of how they live and whatnot. And I also forgot to mention this back in my Blaze video, but Blaze also loves to do art. Like, she loves to do paintings, and she loves, like, putting her emotions out on different, like, art pieces and whatnot. So that's another way that she does it, and it's another way to kind of help her, like, like Banksy and whatnot. He does, like, I wouldn't call it propaganda pieces, but it's very much like protest pieces going up against the world government and whatnot. But she goes under a different alias known as the Smoldering Arts. So, basically that's kind of what she does as well, is that she kind of does, like, graffiti, and also does, like, paintings of her own, and kind of displays it throughout the city and whatnot, right? So, anywho, this is kind of the point in time where Bonk and Blaze kind of, are still kind of going around the city, seeing if they need, or if anyone needs their help and whatnot. But then they notice a spaceship crashing through the sky. And obviously, if you watch my last videos, this is Bolt. And, the kind of first interaction kind of goes well, I guess you can say. Blaze, she's like immediately like, we have to take him. Like, please. Like, she's like, Bonk, please, I'll take care of him. I'll take him outside. I'll give him baths, I promise. And Bonk, on the other hand, is like, no, we don't know where this guy came from. We don't know who he is. And he came out of the spaceship naked. Why doesn't he have any pants on? So, this is kind of the point in time where Bonk, Blaze, and Bolt kind of meet up and, become like a, new family dynamic and whatnot. Him kind of getting adopted by Mother Salem as well, and kind of introducing him to the Heroes for Hire. I got to think of a name. I can't use Heroes for Hire because that's what Marvel does with Luke Cage and Power Man. That's the same character, and Iron Fist and Jessica. Anywho, so basically, he's now part of this, like, business and whatnot, right? So you guys must be asking yourselves, like, how do they, like, get across the city and whatnot? And that's because Bonk was actually able to build at least a structured vehicle. Think of it as like the Shell Racer from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't know what to call it. I guess I'll call it the Honk truck or something. I don't know. Something Klown related. He was able to build it, like, over time, and he was able to get it constructed and built. So, again, as I mentioned before, Bonk is pretty much a savant when it comes to, like, machinery and whatnot, because his father was also a savant. And, with his clown physiology, it kind of gave him comedically super intelligence and whatnot, right? So, anywho, they kind of go through this, escapades. They go on different types of adventures and whatnot. And this leads up to, as I mentioned in my last videos, them kind of going against the Dawn of Steel. So the Dawn of Steel was kind of this mafioso robot AI constructed by, Dr. Samuel Rodriguez Green Day. And, basically kind of runs New York, even though there's a mayor there. He's kind of like, he's kind of underneath the thumb of the Dawn of Steel. So, not really going to go too much in depth about it because, one, I'm still writing it out, and two, it basically kind of boils down to them succeeding and, basically defeating the mafioso gang of the Dawn of Steel and whatnot. And so now the city is freed. And, Bonk is, like, kind of pumped up about this, right? He's like, yeah, we did it. We actually, like, we're heroes and whatnot, right? So it was going good. It was going good until Yami showed up. But yep, everything is gonna go to shit again. As you guys know from my last video, this is kind of the turning point of the story where Yami basically kicks the shit out of, like, all the Rising Renegades and kind of, like, ties them down and makes them watch, like, him basically absorb New York inside of this giant black hole that he's dropped into it. And basically they kind of one showed him that, you know, even if you are able to like free everyone, I still have power and control over this entire world, and you guys can't stand against me. And two, this kind of, you know, demonstrates that, you know, oh shit, like this is the real world now, and you know, you guys want to play make believe, I'll bring you right back out of it, you know what I'm saying? So this is kind of like the turning point in the story where they kind of lose hope, and it's like, well, we had something, but Bonk at this point wants nothing to do with trying to save the world. He's like, all right, we are on the hit list. We have to go into hiding again. You know, we have to stop and whatnot, right? But this is kind of the point where Blaze kind of gets involved and becomes the younger sister to, you know, Bonk, because, you know, just as he guided her to safety, she needs to guide him to the path of righteousness and whatnot, right? So she kind of talks with him and reminds him all the times that they had to go, you know, cold nights together, had to fight off rats for bread and whatnot, how they had to fight and kill just to survive. And so this kind of pumps up Bonk, and, you know, he realizes that he needs to, you know, he realizes that the people do need him, and if he stops now, then all the deaths in New York would be in vain. So, you know, he kind of pulls himself up by the bootstraps and, you know, gets to work and whatnot, right? So, flash forward, obviously, you know, as I mentioned back in my last video, Bonk gets a Star Shard, becomes a pseudo star because of Black Flight. Kova, Rhythm, and Blues are revealed to be double agents for a Black Flight and whatnot, and basically there's an all-out war. So, you know, all-out war between the Rising Renegades and the Black Parade. That's Yami's like little team of misfits, I guess you could say. So as Yami is fighting Bolt, and Blaze is fighting Ivera, who is Bonk going up against? You guys kind of already know. I mentioned this back in my last video, but he fights the Pink Elephant, which is basically my version of the Rhino from Marvel Comics and whatnot. But basically, he's this guy in this giant pink elephant suit. And I'm not really going to go in depth about his backstory because I kind of already did that in my Legend video. And it doesn't really matter in the context, the scheme of things, because this isn't his video. He's going to have his own separate video. But this is kind of where he puts and pushes Bonk to his fullest like potential and whatnot. So he's, you know, while Bonk is able to outsmart him, he doesn't have enough firepower or strength to kind of go up against him. So at this point, you know, Bonk's like, you know what? Screw it. And so he feels this burning hatred inside of him because he kind of, the Pink Elephant brings him back. Like in the ongoing fight, it kind of like knocks him into the like orphanage that where, you know, him and Blaze kind of grew up in. And so, you know, when he was like, you know, firing missiles and whatnot at the place, like this place kind of gets knocked down a bit. He basically destroys Blaze's room, and Blaze's room was full of like all of her arts and tapestry and whatnot, right? So this kind of, you know, not only does this upset like Blaze and whatnot, Blaze was kind of into this whole like kind of part of this ordeal for a little bit before she kind of got knocked off into the fight with Ivera, and that's kind of what caused her to go supernova. Anywho, that'll be a different story. But basically, you know, he saw all the memories of like not only the building that I grew up in kind of basically fall apart in front of him, but also all the memories that he's had with Mother Salem and Blaze. And then he kind of thinks about, you know, the last moments he saw back in Honk-HA when he saw his mother die and his father die and fall to Grinfell. And so this kind of pushes him to his limits, and this is where he unleashes the beast. All those years of pent-up rage, violence, and anger comes out inside of him, and he becomes a true psychomedian. You know, he becomes bigger, he becomes more ruthless, more violent. And so he uses that strength to kind of fight and, you know, basically decimate the Pink Elephant. And so, you know, at this point, he kind of has a piece of rebar, and he's ripped off the chest piece of the Pink Elephant. And before he kills him, he, you know, is hesitant because he realizes that this is not what, you know, heroes are supposed to be, right? You know, if he were to take the life of this person, he doesn't know if he's able to come back, you know. Insert Batman kill, you know, no kill rule here and whatnot, right? So instead, you know, he kind of takes pity on the Pink Elephant because, you know, at this point, the Pink Elephant's just like, kill me. I have nothing to live for. And, you know, he kind of goes on about his sad backstory and whatnot, you know, where it's like, it makes sense and whatnot. It's going to be displayed in both. Like their backstories are going to be displayed in both. Anywho, so basically he takes pity, and instead of killing him with the rebar that he had, instead he hugs the pink elephant and he reminds him that, just because you did bad things doesn't make you an entirely bad person. If you are willing to admit that you were wrong, we can grow together. And so, basically this kind of stops the fight between, the pink elephant and Bonk. Bonk wins the fight, and blah, blah, blah. Yami is destroyed. Ivera's dead. And so the good guys win. Yay. Yippee. So, this is kind of the point in time where, again, it's not all honky-dory and whatnot, because it all basically boils down to this power vacuum that this world is facing. But they have the advantage now because, Yami's no longer in charge. So basically everyone's kind of going at each other's throats, and it's like, no, I'm in charge. And the other person's like, no, I'm in charge. So Black Flight kind of basically steps in and, takes over and kind of exhumes control over the earth, I guess you can say, and whatnot, right? So, at this point now, everyone's kind of learned and grew together as not only friends, but also family and whatnot, right? So, it's all going great until Bonk kind of has this realization. And so this is the end of like the first story arc of the Rising Renegades. It basically ends with Bonk having a nightmare about his mom. And so that's kind of how the story ends, sadly. But it kind of picks up into the second part of the Rising Renegades. I don't have a name for it yet, but just think of it as like a clown's retribution or something. Anywho, this is the point in time where Bonk kind of thinks to himself, I'm alone. I'm all alone. When it comes to at least the elementals and the, metahuman characters, they at least have some form of mentorship and companionship. But me, I'm just a clown, and not even a clown. I'm half a clown and half psychomedian. I'm the furthest to what, anything human at all. So Bonk is kind of in this depressive state. He tries to hide it from his family and his friends and whatnot, but they're able to see that there's something bothering Bonk, and Blaze and Bolts kind of are there to comfort him, even though Blaze and Bonk are kind of, Blaze and Bolt, see, that's what happens when you have characters that sound alike. Anywho, this is kind of the point in time where Blaze and Bolt are in a relationship now, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't stop their relationship with Bonk, who they see as a, big brotherly figure and whatnot, right? So they try to comfort him. They kind of, are there for him, and, obviously kind of blows him off because he's just sure, whatever, just save your words. I'm fine and whatnot. So he kind of isolates himself until one day there's another clown that kind of pops through a portal. Oh, this is not good. Because, as I mentioned before, the clown world was kind of overtaken by Grinfell and whatnot. But there's this clown girl that pops up, and her name is Giddy Giddy. Giddy Giddy, or Gigi, as I like to call her and whatnot, is a nice little nickname. Basically, she kind of finds Bonk, and she gets excited. She gets overly excited. She's like, "Oh my God, you're the Prince Bonk. You are the prince." And he's like, "Prince? I'm not no prince." And he's like, "No, you are. In the Honk-HA files, in the Honk-HA descriptors, it says that one clown / something is destined to rule over Honk-HA and whatnot, right?" So Bonk is confused by this, and basically she kind of invites him into the portal, but he doesn't want to this is kind of he kind of left. There was this party that was happening, not a party, but basically there was this, they were going on different missions and whatnot, and Bonk succeeded in this mission, but he decided to kind of go on this but kind of go on this little escapade with Gigi to kind of go through the portal and see this new Honk-HA. And so the thing is that when it came to Honk-HA, Bolts lived in it, and he kind of saw the culture and whatnot. So he saw Honk-HA and was this place looks like Honk-HA. It sounds like Honk-HA, but it doesn't feel like Honk-HA. There's something off about it. There's something that doesn't feel right about it. And so basically Gigi kind of introduces her himself or introduces him to this new like clown population and whatnot, and everyone's just like, "Oh, joyous day! Bonk, the like greatest clown to ever exist, is here!" And they all kind of like gas him up and whatnot, right? And they kind of like, it's like, we heard, so many stories of how you saved planet Earth, and you spread joy throughout the like entire planet, and you even stopped the pink elephant, and apparently that story got to them, and it's like, yeah, I did and whatnot. So he's confused, but they're kind of like, they're stroking his ego and whatnot, right? It's kind of like playing at his mind games and whatnot, right? So in this story, I'm still kind of writing things out, and this is kind of the point in time where basically Lord Slugger comes back, right? So Lord Slugger, it was, all I'm gonna say is that all of it was a lie. All of it was all a lie. Oh shit, go figure, right? Like, oh, it's too good to be true, and yes, that even means poor Gigi was a part of this the entire time. Her being a psychomedian underneath like Lord Slugger's rule was ordered to get Bonk back into there, and basically, you know, Lord Slugger absorbed all of his like psychomedian energy and kind of left him to rot and whatnot, right? So, this is the point in time where Bonk is kind of at his lowest, and he realized that he was betrayed and whatnot, but he still kind of finds the will to kind of pick himself up and still fight. And so, at this point in time, Lord Slugger kind of goes to Earth and, destroys a lot of things. He basically ensues another Grinfell invasion and kind of sends out a bunch of psychomedians onto Earth, and all of the Earth's heroes, so the Rising Renegades, Junito, Red Tatanka, all of them kind of get involved, and this is kind of like a big crossover event, and whatnot. The teams like the Junito team and the Red Tatanka team don't really play that much of a big role, other than just kind of like killing and destroying like psychomedians and whatnot, right? But at this point in time, things get a lot more emotional, things get a lot more crucial between the relationships of Bonk and his friends and family and whatnot. It gets a lot more strained because Bonk, after getting not gaslit, but basically getting gassed up and being told that he's the greatest, he realized that he found his home. He found his home. He thought he found his home and whatnot, right? And he realized that these are his people and whatnot. And this kind of messes, not messes, but basically this kind of disrupts and throws a wrench into the relationship. But there's a point in time, and I'm not going to spoil it here, but Lord Slugger does kill an important character. You guys get to comment to try to figure out who it is or, what that character is, but basically he kills off a very, very important character and, kind of throws everyone through a loop. A lot of characters, are affected by this and whatnot, right? So, again, I'm still kind of writing things out and trying to understand and trying to correlate how to make this right. But as I mentioned back in my Bolt and Blaze video, this is kind of the point in time where Bonk and Bolt kind of butt heads like brothers and whatnot, right? So obviously they're fighting in Grinfell, and they're kind of duking it out, but they really don't want to fight each other, but they kind of have to kind of prove a point to one another. And as I mentioned before, as a final blow, Bolt's kind of, punches his like through Bonk's chest, but Bonk lives because Bonk is a psychomedian. It takes a lot to kill a psychomedian. So, Bonk uses this as, to his advantage, and kind of like hugs him and opens a portal behind him. And at this point, he hugs Bolt and he says, "I love you so much, brother, no matter what happens today or tomorrow. If I die, wait for me. I'll wait. Excuse me. If I die today, I'll wait for you. And if you pass on, please come find me." And he throws him through the portal. And, this is kind of the point in time where Bonk kind of meets and confronts Lord Slugger. And I'm going to write out the rest of that when I get the chance. But that's kind of where Bonk's story kind of ends at this point. Not ends, but kind of that's where it stops right now, right? So obviously I'm still kind of writing things out. I plan on doing this thing called like the King of Comedy or the King of Tragedy, because that's what, that's the psychology of clowns and the Honk-HA, is that without life, in life there cannot be comedy without tragedy and whatnot, right? So that's kind of where the story is for Bonk And again, not a single mention of the other things I talked about, right? So it's kind of a nice little fresh start. So let's talk about, these powers and abilities right quick, okay? So honestly, there's a lot that this guy has. So, he has super strength, and he's much stronger compared to Blaze and Blaze and Bolt because of his Psychomedian heritage and whatnot. Moderate speed, again, he's quick and he's fast, but he's not like lightning speed and whatnot, and he's even slower than Blaze at certain points and whatnot, right? Super intelligence, this guy is building machines and whatnot, right? I got you on that one. Yeah, so he's over here building mechanisms, and he even builds like different types of like grapple guns and different types of like different types of like playing cards that do different types of different things. So he's a very, very smart fella. So obviously, like him learning this kind of stuff, he also teaches Blaze this kind of stuff as well. So this kind of helps out and whatnot, right? So super intelligence, super durability. Even though I just said that he got his hole punched through his chest, that doesn't really put him down. Bonk is a very durable fella, and again, as I mentioned back from the other two, it takes a lot to actually damage him because of a Psychomedian heritage. It takes I guess you can say, a stupid comedic amount of damage to try to actually hurt him and whatnot, right? Super endurance and super stamina as well. Again, because of his Psychomedian heritage and whatnot. But speaking of his Psychomedian heritage, he's able to tap into that and basically becomes a Psychomedian form, which is just a basic, more bigger version of himself and a lot more violent and a lot more feral. But he's able to tap into another form, which is known as the King of Tragedy form. Now, this form obviously is the opposite form to Lord Slugger's, who's the King of Comedy. And so basically he sprouts wings and how to describe it? Basically his wings are like upside down, and it's like has a bunch of teeth in there. It's going to be so gnarly when I draw it out, but basically it like his wings form this like upside down like sad sad face and whatnot, but they like it's a sad upset face, but it's his wings, and honestly it's going to be so baller when I draw it out and whatnot. And he becomes this more Psychomedian clown form, and this is kind of what he uses to combat Lord Slugger's like King of Comedy form and whatnot, right? So those are his powers and abilities. He also has weapons and whatnot, right? As I mentioned before, he has different cards, different types of playing cards that do different types of things. Razor edge ones that, once it lands to a wall of gas emits from it. Don't ask me how he's able to fit that much gas into the card. That's where his clown physiology kind of comes in, where something doesn't make sense, but it kind of makes sense, right? But he also has his 10-ton hammer, which is basically a hammer that weighs 10 tons and whatnot, right? So he's able to fight and use that, and that's kind of mostly his melee weapon that he goes for. But he also has different types of other gadgets in his like utility belt and whatnot, and has different types of pins that does different types of things as well. Has the acid flower, or not really an acid flower, but basically like a flower that does different types of things when he like calls out to it and whatnot, right? Think of it as like what's his name, Judge Dredd's gun. So like he's like Sunny Day, and like it summons like fire and whatnot, right? Or rainforest or something, and like it spews out water. Still working on that, and I don't know if I'm going to keep that, but that sounds pretty overpowered. But anywho, those are his powers and his abilities and his different gadgets that he has. Where does this character morally stand? This character, obviously is a good guy, right? But the thing about him is that he has a lot of conflicting feelings, because one, obviously he saw a lot in his childhood and whatnot, right? He saw the one home where he can actually relate and be with a lot more of his kin kind of taken away from him and whatnot, right? So he saw that, and he also saw New York kind of get decimated by a black hole, and he immediately gave up. So the thing is about Bonk is that he's a strong-willed character, but he's able to be broken. You know what I'm saying? Like he can resort to his emotions fast. He can definitely feel things, and he doesn't feel like he's enough for his family, but that's what his family is there for, to remind him that there are people who love and care about him and whatnot, right? So, over time he learns to better himself, and I am gonna say this, that Gigi does come back, and Gigi is like, I'm sorry, Bonk, blah 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 blah, redemption arc and whatnot, and Bonk and Gigi kind of become a thing, later on. So, he does have a happy ending and whatnot, right? So, but the thing is that he's not really confrontational person, I guess you could say. He's rather just kind of be, if he's able to like stay where he is, and he's comfortable where he is, then he'll stay like that, right? It kind of took both the like determination of Bolt and Blaze to kind of get him up off his ass to kind of like fight against the world government and whatnot, right? So, good character, but he tends to lack drive whenever he just, whenever he gets comfortable, he tends to lack drive and whatnot. But he also tends to be, cocky and arrogant. Obviously, as I mentioned back in this second story I'm working on, when the clowns and everyone starts like gassing him up, he kind of goes to his head. And so, he loses his way and whatnot. But with his family, he goes back on the right track. So, what does this character mean to me? This character means a lot to me. This character is such a unique specimen because he has nothing to do with the Great War or like anything that I've already mentioned before. He's not a Jury Ray, as I mentioned. Like, he's not a Jury Ray, he's not a Xerxian, he's not an Elemental, he's not a Jorian, he's not, he's not a star or anything. He's a clown. An actual clown. And I find that so stupid, but that is so like interesting. I don't know why. There's just something about like having something from popular media and popular zeitgeist kind of actually be its own species. And I'm shocked that we haven't really had that sort of thing, like we never really made clowns like an actual like type of species in popular media and whatnot. It's kind of always been seen as like an occupation, or it's kind of been seen as like this evil demonic thing, which I mean, it works. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm just, I always found it so weird that we never really tried to make it into a race. So I decided to take it upon myself and kind of expanded and made it into a race and whatnot. Even gave them a little, even threw in a little race war in there and whatnot, right? So, anywho, all I'm trying to say is that this character means a lot to me because, one, not only just who he is, or not just what he is, but also who he is. Because obviously, I am of mixed race myself, and Bonk's conflicting feelings about like, who am I? Like, am I a clown or am I a psychomedian? It doesn't matter at that point. He realizes that he doesn't have to be a clown. He doesn't have to be a psychomedian. He has to be Bonk. He has to be the big brother. He has to be, the pillar that kind of holds everyone together when, worse comes to worse and whatnot, right? So Bonk realizes that, and he becomes a better clown because of it and whatnot, right? I say that, but a better man, I guess you can say. But with all that being said, I am really happy to how this character is kind of coming about in my head, and I really like his design as well. It's just this big bulky, like muscular clown dude who's just really chill and also really smart. And I just find, I think he's gonna really take off when this whole thing takes off and whatnot. I feel like a lot of people are gonna like him. I don't know why. There's just this feeling in my gut that kind of like how we have. Obviously I'm not going to go too in depth about it, but, in different types of internet searches, a lot of people tend to like clowns, I guess you can say. We're not really afraid of them anymore. We tend to really, really like clowns. So, who knows? You kind of know how there's a Clussy. Now get ready for the click, you know what I'm saying? But anywho, with all that being said, I am so glad to how these videos are coming out, and, again, kind of keep an eye out for Instagram posts and YouTube posts on Wednesdays. And, with all that being said, I have been Afromandius. Thank you all so much for watching, and stay fresh and stay frosty, Afrolites. I'll catch y'all next time.